Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today it's all about tone mapping again. We had filmic, we had sigmoid, and now we have AgX. We'll go through all the settings, all the sliders. We'll cover exposure, contrast, and color. We'll try and do that on some examples so we can all understand together how the sliders work and what effect they have on the photos, and also how to get rid of some pesky problems we might have with digital photography. I'm Nicholas, and let's do this together. Well, before starting, I'd just like to say that we're going to look at this set of photos at the bottom here, and they've all been edited the same for the moment. I just have exposure, color calibration, which is in default, the color balance RGB, which is in standard, and then AgX is on, but I haven't done anything to it. The first thing you need to do is set the exposure. This exposure will set the midpoint. So you can assess it by eye. You can do Command B to get that white border, which gives your eye an idea of where white is. Sometimes that's a bit difficult for the eye to imagine, especially when you've got these dark grey borders. So maybe the exposure is correct like this. And then we'll find in the first part, the input exposure range, the first part of AgX, the white relative and black relative exposures, just like in filmic. I basically just click on auto tune levels and it will give me the bright point, the brightest point on the photo, which will be close to the white of the screen, and the darkest point of the photo, which will be close to the black on the screen. And that for me is fine. We have another auto tune here, which doesn't read what's in the white frame, which is reading where is the white point and where is the black point, which will actually assess automatically from the exposure module and maybe from some metadata in the camera, and it will assess things slightly differently. Now, I can't see, well, usually, there is a difference. You can see the difference. One is brighter, one is more contrasty. The other one here is a bit duller. Sometimes there isn't even that much difference. Usually I just go on auto tune levels, looking at the image, and that's fine. The dynamic range scaling we already had in filmic, which is pretty useless because you are at risk of clipping some whites if you do that. But why not if you want to? We've got some severe clipping here. You are increasing contrast slightly one way, decreasing it the other. I just go for auto tune levels and I do the rest somewhere else. If I want some more contrast, I have a contrast slider, and that is the one I use first. I'm going to have a good look at this contrast slider because most of what we're going to say now has to do with this curve and the contrast. So the curve here is built around this center point, which is the exposure. 0 is 0 EV, which has been set. That is the exposure point. So that is just an artificial 0. We're saying that that goes to 18%. And it is chosen with the slider on the exposure module to know exactly what we're doing with the image. 18% is neutral grey. In physical terms, 50% grey to our eye, which is the mid grey. And everything will turn around this point. So the contrast, you see, this curve is turning around that point. So this is the point, the area of the image with maximum contrast, because the steeper the slope, the more contrast you have. And if you're somewhere else around here, there's less contrast. But the exposure, you see, was taken globally and not locally. So maybe the contrast, you want it to be stronger on another part of the image. If you're lucky, the most contrast will be on the thing you're looking at, let's say the bird here. And this is what the pivot relative exposure and target output are meant to do. It is just to change, just for AgX and not for anything else. Everything, all the modules before AgX depend on the mid-grey setting exposure. We can change the relative exposure and say that 18% will be set at 1 EV above the 0 that was set at the in the exposure module, which darkens the photo, because it's everything that was brighter, 1 stop brighter, that goes to 18, which makes everything darker. And if you want, if we make it 1 stop lower than the exposure, go to 18, then everything gets brighter. And you think, this is interesting, this is a brightness slider. Well, not really, we can do brightness somewhere else, but this actually sets where you want the maximum contrast to be. So you can choose with here the little dropper, and you can draw a rectangle, and you say that the average, here I'll take some kind of average inside your rectangle, and it will move, well, it hasn't moved it very much, has it? It will move the relative exposure, and now this is the zone of maximum contrast in the image. The what's it called here? The pipette in French. The eyedropper, sorry, the eyedropper in English, will only affect the relative exposure when you use this one. But if we can reset this to 0, if you try the relative, the target output, and you do a square, it will affect both the relative exposure and the target output. And it will move that, it will move actually both of them to try and keep an even exposure on your image. So when you're using them, I would try both of them and see which one suits you best. Let's say we go on to this image here. The exposure globally seems okay. We'll do just auto tune levels. I'll just show you that the camera and the on-screen measure doesn't change much for me. We can now get the contrast, and here I have a choice to make. Either I want to put contrast in the water and forget about the forest, maybe have a softer forest, or we want a very contrasty forest and the water will be what it is but less contrasty. That can be a choice you make. So let's go to the pivot relative exposure, and we'll choose an area in the water, and this will give me, this is going to mid-gray, which means that as it's bright, everything else is dark. If I can put it around here, it won't change much because I'm in the bright areas. So that's not very successful because the rest is too dark. So I'd have a tendency to go to pivot the target output and put it somewhere there. And then the contrast, you see, I'm going to get very good contrast in this area here and less contrast somewhere else. Now I can move the target output. This is some kind of brightening, but you can still see that the maximum contrast is in the water, and here we have some very soft transitions between the lighter and darker parts of the forest. If on the other hand, you want to change that, so to take a snapshot, you want to change that and put the target input in the forest, the target output is wrong. So that's too bright, so we can move the target output down maybe, or change directly just the target output. And I can put some contrast here in the trees and less contrast in the water. Now maybe I'm too bright, maybe I should change the exposure. I do have some things actually to mitigate that if this is too bright, but this is where you set the contrast. And the amount of contrast you set with the contrast slider. If you meet an orange part of the curve, contrary to filmic, where this was an error saying we have negative numbers, so be careful because anything you do after in the display settings, then we might have negative numbers and some artifacts or something. This is not an error. This is just to say, be careful, you've lost your S-curve, which means that you're losing the ability to change your contrast in the highlights and in the shadows. And this is where we come to the two next sliders, which are shoulder power and toe power, which will give me, once you've set your area of contrast and the amount of contrast, we can now modify the contrast in the highlights with the shoulder power, which will give me a more accentuated curve at the point over the relative exposure pivot, the pivot point, if you like. So here flatter and here brighter. And that's brilliant because we can now get, which we couldn't get in sigmoid, some very bright brights. And that's really brilliant. And toe power, which will enable me to crush the blacks a little bit more. You can see it notably here in the very dark areas. I can reduce that and get some detail back, or decide to lose it. Sometimes this is where it's going to get a little bit more complicated. Sometimes you see, when you have a target which is kind of way out of whack, and let's imagine you're somewhere around here, and you move the shoulder power or the toe power, and you're losing, you can't find a place. I can actually show you that with it if I reduce the contrast. Shoulder power, you see, is not doing anything. The curve is the wrong way around. But imagine I want a low contrast scene, but I still want to get these whites whiter, and I can't because shoulder power isn't working anymore. Now we have a workaround for this in the advanced curve parameters. Now we have shoulder start, target white, toe start, target black, and curve Y gamma. Sounds complicated. Target black is something easy. It's kind of this faded look where the black won't be at 0, the black will be grey. That is kind of film simulation stuff. Target white, if you don't want the whites to be white, but you want them to be grey, that is something that I would not touch either, but you can. Shoulder start and toe start, we're going to start finding things just like in filmic, where we have what was called the line. What was it called in filmic? I should know that. Let's find filmic. Filmic RGB. We had this in latitude. Look, we have the same thing in latitude. Latitude means that we are defining a zone where the tone compressor makes a straight line. So the zone of maximum contrast is larger because that's the most you can get. We don't really, unless you have something very specific, I'm not sure you really need to change those, because the curves are very well made in AgX and are gradual. So the tone curve is already good enough most of the time. What you can do though is, if I'm losing the ability to change my shoulder power, you can work on the curve gamma. And the curve gamma, you see, I'm doing this, it's brightening the photo a bit. What it's doing is it's moving. The gamma is a number that's it's a multiplication. Normally it's 2.2, and it makes a curve which I'm doing this from memory, which it's the same as the base curve we used to have in the old darktable, which would give you a difference between a linear response, the kind of flat photo, and something more contrasty, something that's more close to what our eyes actually see, and that's the gamma. Now, I'm not doing any physics here. I'm just using this as an artifact, as a tool to get my curve kind of changed a bit, to move the shoulder start to where it was. And now I've got, if you see what I mean here, with a higher gamma, without having modified the photo that much, I've still got very low contrast. I can actually start adding some more brightness to the whites, and you can see that here on the display, not the histogram, the what's it called, the parade. I like that. And so these are kind of extra tools to enable us to keep control over shoulder power and toe power, even when our choices for the global contrast don't let us do that. Okay, so I'm going to play around with this. Play around with gamma if you've lost the ability to change shoulder and toe power. Let's have a look at another photo, recap all that, and see if we've got it. Okay, onto this photo, street photo. Quite like it actually. It's a bit wonky. So let's go to rotate and perspective, put it straight. And now the idea is to get a very high contrast image and get these beautiful white, this brightness. The sun was straight in front of me, and maybe get some contrast, maximum contrast on this part of the glass here. That's what I want to do. So how's it done? Dead easy. Relative exposure. Well, it didn't do much, did it? Look at that. It just brought down the brights a little bit. Contrast. Well, I want a high contrast scene because I want kind of a silhouette. I will change the target output and put it here. And you can see I'm getting some detail, different colors actually in that area, which is not so bad. Shoulder power. Now, it's got harsh or soft transitions, but that's not bad. Toe power. Yes, I want kind of a high toe power. I don't really need to change, you see, the advanced curve parameters because I have enough control over the shoulder and the toe, so I don't need to touch those. And now maybe I can go into the next part. So that was a recap, you see, so that was quick. This gives me a nice transition, exactly what I wanted. I'm chuffed. Let's go on to something else. The look. Now the look is not scene referred, it's display referred. So all this happens as a tone compressor. So we're taking the data from the scene referred workflow. AgX does its thing, and we have, this is a bonus really, is that once the tone mapping is done, we have 5 sliders which we can play with, which would be as if there was a module after AgX and before the output color profile. So we can modify our white point here. So the slope will give us, here we can actually make our whites brighter if we want to, creatively, which I might do just a little bit. There we are, extend the whites. The lift, if we look at lift, if I bring it down, it's going to squash the blacks, but you can see it's not touching the whites. So we can use this to kind of control the kind of the black point. We can control the dark tones. I can bring this down to get some extra blacks in the silhouette, which is always difficult to do in a tone compressor because it respects tonality so much that some more extreme transformations are difficult. Brightness is exactly that. We're more kind of for the mid-tones. Now I can get the mid-tones. What I could do is bring up the mid-tones, bring down the lift. And so the spread of light is a bit bigger, but I still have the darks. And the saturation, well, that speaks for itself. Or maybe I want a color photo, I can kind of saturate that quite a lot. Now it will only saturate the midtones. The brights cannot be saturated on a normal SDR monitor. You need some HDR for that, but that is not the topic of the day. Anyway, it's not the point of a tone compressor. The tone compressor is to get everything into what you've got and not to kind of lust after a screen that you don't. And there we are for the basic settings of AgX. And now we need to talk about color. Now we'll start with this image, which I took on a motorway. I was not driving, and I've been using this. I showed it actually in pixel.us on the forum, and it's actually been used quite a lot since to actually ask how do you get a good kind of a good sunset with darktable, because it wasn't working. What I had with filmic, I don't know if you remember the good old days of filmic, is if I enable filmic, then all I had was this kind of orange sunset, and it wasn't like that. And that's how I discovered the Bezold-Brucker effect, which in reality, the sunset is orange or red. What I see, I hope what we all see, is a sunset that's kind of more yellow. And this has to do with preserve hue. AgX always filmic preserves hue really well, but sometimes in bright colors, you need to disable that. In fact, in most cases, the designers of AgX have decided that we're not going to preserve the hue, and that will give us good sunsets. So, right, good, brilliant for that. Add some more contrast. And we can maybe increase the shoulder power, the toe power, and there we are. My colors are fine. I can saturate just a little bit. Be careful not to oversaturate. So that's the preserve hue, which we can also use mostly in sunsets. That's where I'd see this preserve hue to be kept. Just to recap again, just to show you how I use AgX, I will go to the pivot target output, maybe decide that the sky is what I'm interested in. So I'll select the sky. That will give me a new relative exposure. I'll get the contrast up, shoulder power. Come on, let's get some bright light in the center here. What I don't like to see is the ring kind of where you see where the sun clipped. It always does clip. And so let's have some bright light, toe power, not too much, just a little bit of detail. And then I will go to saturation, give that a nice boost. Maybe make it just a little bit brighter. There we are. Get some more contrast by bringing the lift down. I don't want to touch the slope too much. And there we are. It's a bit oversaturated, isn't it, really? Anyway, that is one image done. I have done exactly what I showed you. How long did it take me? 30 seconds if I'm not talking. And I've got good basic start, because now you can start working on local settings and maybe work out some more detail in the sky. Anyway, lots of work to do on the image, but that was AgX, the tone mapper. When color is a problem, then AgX also has a solution. Now, color is problematic in digital photography, when we're trying to capture colors that we can't reproduce on a screen, and some colors that even cameras have difficulty in getting, and those are the very bright lights. Think lasers, think concert music. And here, very strangely, this was a part of a Christmas decoration scene at a local abbey. So we had candles and we had these modern sculptures which were lit by white lights from above and blue lights from below. And the colors kind of don't look quite right to me. Now, AgX is already doing a good job with the colors, even if we don't like it exactly as it is. And I'll show you why it's doing a good job. Let's just get the contrast up a little bit. I'm not going to do too much to this. Yeah, I'll keep it like that. Maybe lower the contrast a bit, actually. And I'm not going to resaturate. Let's go to the primaries. Now, first of all, if AgX was doing nothing, this is what we'd get. The problem is here, is that the blues, which were very bright, have oversaturated, and without a good tone mapping algorithm, we're going to get no details in these very bright blues. I'm talking blues here, but it could be reds, greens, anything that's bright, anything that's very strong saturated light. So AgX is already doing a very good job without me actually changing any of these sliders, and it's giving me some details back. Now, I only go to the primaries if I'm not happy with the colors, which is on very, very few photos. So I would just stay in settings and that's done. Any work on colors I would do in color balance RGB, color equalizer, whatever. This is made to mitigate any problems in tone mapping. We have a few presets. If you go on this little icon here, we have blender-like, which is the one that's standard and it works fine for me. Smooth, slightly different. We can see a rotation of the colors. The blues here have become a bit purple. And unmodified, which means all the settings are at 0, and that's as if you disable the adjustments. So actually nothing happening. The difference is disable adjustments, you can't change anything, and just putting it to unmodified just sets everything to 0 and sorts itself out. So I'm going to start at blender-like because it's the best starting point for me. And what we're going to do is I'm going to show you exactly how to use these. It looks complicated. In theory, it's not. In practice, it can be difficult to get right. We have two sliders for each color, red, green, blue. We can attenuate, which means we can reduce the saturation. And we can rotate, which means change the color, the hue. This is before the tone mapping. The aim of that is to get the colors into the gamut. The gamut is the set, the quantity of available colors. The problem you see with the blues is that they are very fast out of gamut. So if we do a tone mapping, so if we're kind of brightening some things that are already kind of very close to being to the edge of what we can actually show, then they will just they'll just leave the gamut and they'll be put at the brightest possible value, which is the same for everyone, and that's why we get plain, and we lose all the details because everyone goes to the same blue. In practice, what we can do is attenuate. You can do this as much as you like until you get details back. Here, no details. Here, I've got some details. There we are. I'm attenuating the blues. If the blue's slightly the wrong color, you can also rotate. You can rotate quite a lot. This can be artistic if you like, but that's not what it's made for. So we're about -3. That seemed okay to me. So what it's doing is desaturating the blues. Then it's doing the tone mapping. And then after, we can control how much color we're putting back at the end. So I can boost what was attenuated. I can add purity, which is the opposite. Whatever I rotated, I can rotate in reverse, so put it back. So if I add some blue, and I can add quite a lot, obviously not too much, but I can add some back. And in theory, I will get some better, you see, I'll get something much better than if I didn't reverse. No, sorry, reverse all means that if whatever I attenuate by 44%, it'll add 44% back. But notice I've still got some detail. And if I don't click on reverse all, I can choose individually for each slider what I want. I don't use reverse all because I don't find it useful. I will play around with the sliders until I find something I am pleased with. The idea being that, is if I reverse that, then the reverse rotation, I'm having difficulties getting it back. So it's not kind of a magic tool for anything. I will actually just try and get something I like. And this normally should give me some extra variations in the colors, which is not working very well there. I don't think I need it actually for this image. I'd play around with it by hand. What I had before was this. If I disable adjustments and if I add them back, I have that. Now this is what AgX is doing to my colors. So it's actually giving me some very good details back. There's not much to know about this, really. It's all experimentation. The one thing I didn't say was set from above, which I don't use either, because what it'll do is all these sliders are moved by hand. It will just put them to the exact same thing as the ones above. So I have -5.7 in rotation. It'll put -5.7 to rotate backwards. I don't see that as being any help. I'll go back to blend alike and I'll just attenuate the blues a little bit more and give a bit of purity, and that's fine for me. Let's try with this last photo. I'll show you a bit more in detail what we can do. So this final image is fraught by problems: too much red, lack of contrast, lack of details. It was taken during a concert of tango music. It was actually very, very good guitarist. I'll do the basic tuning for the or the what we call the settings, which will be the tonalities. Maybe I will change the contrast. Let's add some contrast mainly to this area of the guitar player. There we are. Shoulder power. Well, don't really need to push that too hard. Toe power, which will darken things. I'm not going to change the look for the moment because that would be actually the last thing to do. The problem we have now is we have a lot of magenta. The lights were red. We had some blues, and now I have some magenta. And there wasn't any magenta. It was reds and blues, well, mainly reds actually. So what I can do is I'm going to, first of all, what I should do is check whether I prefer Blender smooth or unmodified. Basically, it won't be a surprise to you if I use Blender most of the time. It's the one by default, and I think that's for a good reason. I'm going to attenuate the reds, but I'm also going to attenuate the blues. And by attenuating the blues, that will get rid of a lot of the magenta. Right. Now, if I rotate the blues a little bit, I'm also mitigating that extra magenta I don't particularly want in the photo. Now, there might have been some remnants of magenta mixed with the blue, some kind of blue light that was somewhere, but that's not what I want. And I think doing a photo is all about what you want, the final effect. Now I have the red, I can add some red, and I can also modify the rotation. I think I will rotate a little bit towards the oranges, and maybe, now I have, oh, that's why. I was wondering why rotation wasn't working. I have some master sliders here I haven't talked about, which are at 100%. Now, this rotation, it should have worked better on the previous photo and it wasn't. I was wondering why. So I'm going to rotate a little bit back to red, and maybe we could put some blues back in, but not too much, just a little bit. And you have the two masters here. The masters at 100 will affect all the sliders below. So purity will affect your purity boosts, basically multiplying them by 1. So if I put the master up to 200, instead of having a purity boost of 41, I've got a purity boost of 82, and here I've got a purity boost of 52, so just doubling everything. And here it's not modifying anything, and here it's halving everything. So if you've overdone it or underdone it on these sliders and you've spent time and you like the balance, you have the master button here, which I will kind of put a little bit under 100. And the rotation, same thing as in that it will take the reverse rotations here, and if you're at 100, multiply them by 1, which does nothing, and here you can attenuate or increase all the rotations proportionally. There we are, so you're not changing the balance. So I will actually put that kind of back there. And that's it for the colours, you see. And what I have is I have gained some, I'm going to take a snapshot of that. And what I can do is go back to Blender-like and show you just by moving things around manually. And I'm not pretending I know very much about color theory. I have gone from this to this. So you see the face, how it's cleaned up. Now the photo still needs some work doing on it, but I've got rid of that magenta cast. I've got some nice reds, much better. The halo up here is much better. So that's solved a lot of the color problems. And that is how powerful AgX is with the primaries tab. So don't be afraid to play with it. And I've just got rid of everything I did. Okay. Oh, Control Z, will that work? Yes. The photo still needs some work doing on it, but that's not the aim of this video. So I hope now you've seen me play with all the sliders on a set of photos, you know a little bit more what to do. I have one last example, which is this one, which is the only one I've found where preserve hue is actually better on 100 than on 0. So I'll show you that quickly. Let's do the auto tune levels. Let's add the contrast. I'm going to put the target output maybe here. Contrast is a bit too high now. Shoulder power. I'm looking at the sky, the brightest areas. That's not too bad. I don't want to squash the blacks too much. Do I need more saturation? Yes, please. Nice, bright, sunny day. The brightness, the lift. Maybe I can lift the shadows just a little bit. I'm okay for the slope. I don't want anything to be lower. And there we are. I'm quite pleased with the tonalities, the colours for that. How long did it take? Not that long. Now just let's zoom into this Japanese bridge, which is red. Now, as I say, you might find some photos where the preserve hue is interesting. Usually it's on 0 and it's fine. But if you look here, where the reds are in the sun, it's turned orange. The bridge is red. But if I move preserve hue up, I am gaining, look, it's going a little bit more red, and I prefer that. So I am preserving the hue of the bridge. You can't see it from here, you wouldn't see it on a huge print, but that is something that you can look at if you have strange reflections, colours that are changed in a bright area compared to a dark area. Try and play with preserve hue, and that might give you something interesting. Well, there we are. I think that's it for me today. We've been through AgX. You have all the tools you need to play around with the settings and learn quietly, peacefully, on your own, in your own head, how it works and how you're going to use it in the future. And I will leave you there and wish you a very good day. Bye-bye then.